morning, everyone. Thank you, Jesse. Yes, we're going to be reading this morning Acts chapter 12. Acts chapter 12 is our account of Peter's being arrested and put in prison by Herod. Peter's friends are praying for him, of course, praying that they could get him out of prison, and God will help him escape. When he goes to his friend's house, we're going to see that they can't even believe that he is really Peter. How could that possibly be? He's in prison, yet there he is at their door. They just don't believe it's him. So that's most of the story. The end of the chapter is the death of Herod, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So let me just go over a couple of verses first. Verse 1 of chapter 12 says, "Now about that time, Herod the king laid hands on some who belonged to the church in order to mistreat them." So this is continued persecution of the church, and Herod is a very bad fellow, and he's rounding up Christians and throwing them in prison. This Herod, by the way, is Herod Agrippa I. He's the grandson of Herod the Great, who was ruling during the birth of Christ. This is a different Herod. It's Herod Agrippa. Now in verse 2, it says, "And he had James, the brother of John, put to death with a sword." This James is one of the 12 apostles. He's the first of the 12 to be executed or killed as a Christian. Of course, Judas was the first to die, but not in this manner. He was not persecuted or a martyr of the church. So this James, as I mentioned, is the first one of the apostles to die this way. Moving down to verse 6, Peter has been arrested, and it says in verse 6, "On the very night when Herod was about to bring him forward," in other words, for a trial, "Peter was sleeping between two soldiers, bound with two chains, and guards in front of the door were watching over the prison." Well, you can see Peter's not really worried about this. He's asleep, and he knows he's supposed to go up before Herod and probably die, but at least that's what happens to most of them. But Peter has a different promise. He received a promise from the Lord back in John chapter 21. I'm going to read a couple verses out of that, verses 18 and 19, where the Lord says to Peter, "Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were younger and used to gird yourself and walk wherever you wished, but when you grow old," okay, well, that's a good phrase right there, when you grow old. Peter's not old while he's in prison, so he knows he's going to grow old. "When you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will gird you and bring you where you do not wish to go." Now this he said, signifying by what kind of death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, "Follow me." So Peter knows he's got a different future than this death here in prison. He knows God has a different plan for his life. And so he's, as we say, he's not worried. He's asleep. As we move to verse 7, Jesse, if you'll put up my first slide on that. Verse 7 says, "Behold, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared, and the light shone in the cell. And he struck Peter's side and woke him up, saying, 'Get up quickly.' And his chains fell off his hands." We see here in this verse and the picture of the angel taking the chains off of Peter and speaking to him, telling him to get up. Let's move down to verses 8 through 10, and I have another picture for that. Jesse, if you'd flip the picture for me. These verses describe how the angel gets Peter up, gets him out of prison, and he tells Peter, follow him out the door, and out the door they go. And the verses will describe how the the guards are still asleep or knocked out, or somehow they're not aware of what's happening here. Verse 10, as they passed the first and second guard, they came to the iron gate that leads to the city, which opened for them by itself. And they went out along one street, and immediately the angel departed from him. All right, let's go down to verses 12 and 13. This and there's a new slide for you to put up, Jesse. It'll be a picture of Peter knocking on Mary's door. He has walked out of the prison. He's over at Mary's house now, where all his friends are gathered. They're all there praying. Verse 12 and 13. As I read 13, it says, when he knocked at the door of the gate, a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer. She recognizes Peter's voice, and she's so excited she doesn't even open the door, but runs back in to tell all of Peter's friends that Peter's out there standing by the gate. And in verse 15, and I've got another picture of that, Jesse, if you'll flip to the next slide. Verse 15, they didn't even believe it was Peter at the door. After all, how could that possibly be? The guy's in prison. How could he be here at our door? So they were quite bewildered about that. And of course, prayer was answered. And that happens to a lot of us. We pray for something or about something, and then it happens, and then we're wondering, how could that have possibly happened? But God does answer prayer, and that's what we see here in these verses. Okay, I want to move down to verse 19. And this is Herod, and he's ordering these guards that were watching Peter to be executed. Verse 19, when Herod had searched for him and could not find him, he examined the guards and ordered that they be led away to the execution. So this is something that Herod, he's actually quite evil. He's not a nice guy. He's a bad leader. And this is the first thing he thinks of, sort of a knee-jerk reaction, to execute the guards. I will point out these guards are not Roman centurions. If you're a Roman centurion and your prisoner escapes, then the punishment for you is death. These are not Roman centurions. These are palace guards. And so this is probably not a valid order. But nevertheless, Herod is the one in charge. And so that's what he says to happen. Moving down to verse 23, and I do have another slide for that. Verse 23. It says, well, in verse 22, we can see the people are kept crying out, the voice of God and not of a man. They're praising Herod or chanting for Herod, calling him a god, which he thinks he is. And in verse 23, immediately an angel of the Lord struck him because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and died. This eating of worms is was a description of a very long and agony type of death. I read one account that it was probably over a period of 5 days that he was dying and very in pain, a lot of pain. So God overruled Herod here because Herod was such a bad leader. Remember, we're still in the early days of the church, and God could not allow this to continue. So that's why he struck down Herod, because of Herod's believing he's a god and killing a lot of Christians or throwing them in prison. Just a bad start to the whole thing. So I guess we could say goodbye to Herod on this one. I do want to point out a couple things out of verses 19 to 23. As I mentioned before, these are palace guards, and we don't see a verse here that says that these guards were actually executed. They probably weren't. It looks like God overruled on that account also by taking Herod out. So I don't know for sure. I still found anywhere that actually says they were or were not executed, but chances are they probably weren't. Okay, I am now ready to begin Acts chapter 12 at verse 1, and we'll begin our reading there. So here we go. Now about that time, Herod the king laid hands on some who belonged to the church in order to mistreat them. And he had James, the brother of John, put to death with a sword. When he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. Now it was during the days of unleavened bread. When he had seized him, he put him in prison, delivering him to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending after the Passover to bring him out before the people. So Peter was kept in the prison, but prayer for him was being made fervently by the church of God. On the very night when Herod was about to bring him forward, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and guards in front of the door were watching over the prison. And behold, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared, and a light shone in the cell. And he struck Peter's side and woke him up, saying, "Get up quickly." And his chains fell off his hands. And the angel said to him, "Gird yourself and put on your sandals." And he did so. And he said to him, "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me." And he went out and continued to follow, and he did not know that what was being done by the angel was real, but thought he was seeing a vision. When they had passed the first and second guard, they came to the iron gate that led into the city, which opened for them by itself. And they went out and went along one street, and immediately the angel departed from him. When Peter came to himself, he said, "Now I know for sure that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from the hand of Herod and from all the Jewish people that the Jewish people were expecting." And when he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, who was also called Mark, where many were gathered together and were praying. When he knocked at the door of the gate, a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer. When she recognized Peter's voice, because of her joy, she did not open the gate, but ran in and announced that Peter was standing in front of the gate. They said to her, "You are out of your mind." But she kept insisting that it was so, and they kept saying, It is his angel." But Peter continued knocking, and when they opened the door, they saw him and were amazed. But motioning to them with his hand to be silent, he described to them how the Lord had led him out of the prison, and he said, "Report these things to James and the brethren." Then he left and went to another place. Now when the day came, there was no small disturbance among the soldiers as to what could have become of Peter. When Herod had searched for him and had not found him, he examined the guards and ordered that they be led away to execution. When he went down from Judea to then he went down to Judea and Caesarea and was spending time there. Now he was very angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and with one accord they came to him, and having won over Blastus, the king's chamberlain, they were asking for peace because their country was fed by the king's country. On an appointed day, Herod, having put on his royal apparel, took his seat on the rostrum and began delivering an address to them. The people kept crying out, "The voice of a God, not of a man." And immediately an angel of the Lord struck him because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and died. But the word of the Lord continued to grow and be multiplied. And Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem when they had fulfilled their mission, taking along with them John, who was also called Mark.
Thank you very much. May the Lord bless the reading of his word to us.